in our time of need. 2 Corinthians 12, 8 and the 9 reads, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Titus 2:11 and the 12 reads, for the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. And finally, 1 Corinthians 11 and 13 reads, there hath no temptation taken hold of you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful. He will not suffer you to be tempted beyond that which ye are able to bear. But with the temptation will also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. As to speak in these perilous COVID-19 times, as we begin to emerge out of it, as we reflect and look back on where God has brought us from, truly we can say he is good, his mercies endureth forever. But for his grace, but for the grace of a loving and merciful God, we are where we are. And as the songwriter said, your grace and mercy has brought, he says, me through, but I said us through. We're living this moment because of him. I want to thank him and to praise him too. Father Yahweh Elohim, it's your grace and your mercy that's brought us through. And we pray that as we begin to internally open our borders, that the grace of God would remain with us and to sustain us. The Bible admonishes us to pray. Let's join together. Our Father, what in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Brent Simonet, Desmond Bannister, Brentwood Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Dr. Blaine Sands, Marvin James, Frankie Campbell, Nikhil Yagula, Michael Pinchard, Darren Enfield, Ramal Ferrer, Lanisha Rose, Brendan Rose, Ellsworth Johnson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Patricia Parker Edgecombe, Aaron Lewis, Carlton Bolag, James Aldridge, Travis Robinson, Adrian Johnson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McElpine, Hank Johnson, Mark Hume, Michael Foley, Miriam Becky Emmanuel, Reese Chipman, Ruben Ramming, Ricky Mappy, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, Chanel Ferguson, Dennis Hannah Martin, Faisal Forbes, Chester People.
Good morning, honorable members. Honorable members, just before we proceed with the order of business, I wish to bring to the attention of this Parliament something that I believe is a very significant achievement by one of our colleagues. The Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, together with the McGill University in Canada offers a number of programs for the development of parliamentarians and the deepening of democracy throughout the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. That Commonwealth Parliamentary Association is made up of approximately 180 parliaments and legislatures who work together to deepen democracy throughout the Commonwealth. The Bahamas happens to be the fourth oldest of the parliamentary democracies within that association. And our colleague, the Deputy Speaker and the member for Tall Pines, undertook one of the courses that is being offered by the McGill University in conjunction with the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. And I'm pleased to announce to this Parliament that the Deputy Speaker was not only successful, but he attained A grades in all of the subjects offered. This is a copy of his diploma issued. If you can zoom in on this, I don't know which camera is on me. You can zoom in on that. This is a copy of the certificate awarded for completion of that exercise. And I believe that as we move forward out of this COVID-19 experience, that what is very fundamental to the deepening of democracy is the independence and autonomy of the Parliament of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, which is the fourth oldest parliamentary democracy within this Commonwealth of 180 nations. I'll say some more about this later, but I just want to put the Parliament on notice that the sessional committees of this Parliament, in my estimation, have not been functioning the way it is constitutionally expected for them to function. And as a consequence, those sessional committees will be reconstituted, and that announcement will be made at a later date. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg lay on the table a copy of the following. The Emergency Powers COVID-19 number 4 Order 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Emergency Powers COVID-19 Lockdown number 9 Order 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. Emergency Powers COVID-19 Bimini Lockdown Amendment number 2 Order 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. order that the document will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a copy of the bill for. Oh, Leon. Oh, sorry, I apologize.
Any further laying of documents by ministers? Thank you, honorable member. Statements and communications by ministers. Communication by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Raring to go this morning. I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a copy of the following: the Banks and Trust Companies Regulation Act, and to consolidate, a bill for an act to repeal the Banks and Trust Companies Regulation Act, and to consolidate and modernize the law regulating banks and trust companies within the Bahamas and for connected matters.
Is there a seconder? Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to repeal the Banks and Trust Companies Regulation Act and to consolidate and modernize the law regulating banks and trust companies within the Bahamas and for connected matters. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to repeal the Banks and Trust Companies Regulation Act and to consolidate and modernize the law regulating banks and trust companies within the Bahamas and for connected matters.
Further first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to repeal the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act, Chapter 351, to consolidate and modernize the law governing the Central Bank of the Bahamas and for connected matters.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to repeal the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act, Chapter 351, to consolidate and modernize the law governing the Central Bank of the Bahamas and for connected matters. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to repeal the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act, Chapter 351, to consolidate and modernize the law governing the Central Bank of the Bahamas and for connected matters.
Further first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Protection of Depositors Act to streamline the role and functions of the Deposit Insurance Corporation to provide for enhanced protection for depositors and for connected purposes.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Protection of Depositors Act to streamline the role and functions of the Deposit Insurance Corporation to provide for enhancement or enhanced protections for depositors and for connected purposes thereto. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the protections of the Depositors Act to streamline the role and functions of the Deposit Insurance Corporation, to provide for enhanced protections for depositors and for connected purposes thereto.
Further, first reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I now stand to move for second reading and passing a bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the Government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st July 2020 and ending 30th June 2021. And Mr. Speaker, there are a number of bills that accompany this bill, and we'll be debating all of them as a compendium, including the resolution that will be passed at the end of the session.
Thank you, honorable member. Honorable member, on the agenda, where are you starting? At number? One? Okay.
Got it?
Yes, I have.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I'd like to just once again express our condolences and sympathy with our brother colleague minister, the Honorable Ellsworth Johnson, who is not with us this morning as he is traveling to Bimini to bury his beloved sister, Kim. Mr. Speaker, I think we all know the circumstances, and we certainly do pray that God will continue to strengthen and keep them during this difficult time. Mr. Speaker, just over a week ago, I stood before this Honorable House to present the 2020-2021 budget communication, which outlined a prescriptive plan for how this administration would lead the country from crisis to opportunity. We dubbed this budget Resilient Bahamas, a plan for restoration. The budget I presented sets out the framework for our economic recovery. I want to start my contribution today, Mr. Speaker, by thanking the constituents of East Grand Bahama for the opportunity to stand before this House once again to open the 2020-2021 budget debate. My constituents place their trust in me to represent their needs and to act in their best interest, and indeed the interest of the Bahamian people. I want to assure them that I wake up every morning and put my best foot forward to serve the Bahamian people, and especially the people of East Grand Bahama. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, Grand Bahama has seen some tough times. But last year, it experienced a catastrophic event that tested the faith of my fellow constituents like none before. While the storm brought destruction and hardship, it also showed the resolve and the resilience of our people, and I am honored to represent them. And I want to commit to them that we have not forgotten them and we do not take struggle lightly. Mr. Speaker, no matter how long it takes, we will rebuild together. The government will continue to invest in Grand Bahama and in Abaco, and we will continue to create opportunities for our communities to rise up stronger and better than before. We cannot lose hope. We cannot lose faith. Trust in the strength of the community, and I will continue to do my best to represent you each and every day. To my hardworking consistency team, who holds down the affairs of our constituency while I am attending to national matters, I want to say a special thank you. Mr. Speaker, in my debate contribution today, I plan to delve deeper into the government's accelerated reforms to facilitate long-term economic growth. In particular, I will outline the performance and plans of the Ministry of Finance, which undergirds a number of these reform measures. My intention is also to correct the record and clear up several misconceptions that have been perpetuated by the opposition about our fiscal outlook, the government's fiscal performance, and our strategy for resilient Bahamas. This is important to address because our decisions in the past have positioned us to effectively manage the unprecedented crisis we face today. Lastly, I will show how this administration plans to return a more sustainable fiscal path once the economic recovery begins. As my fellow cabinet colleagues and members of parliament make their contributions, what you will hear throughout the entirety of the budget debate is how all sectors of government are doing their part to provide immediate, short-term solutions and, more broadly, to support a robust economic recovery overall. Together, we will present a comprehensive government perspective on how we will bridge the gap between where we are now and where we are going. Mr. Speaker, for the past 3 years, our driving objective has been sustainable economic growth over the medium and long term. A key component of our strategy has been fiscal consolidation, which is about steering the public finances toward a balanced position over time through revenue enhancement and expenditure containment. Prior to the double external shocks to our economy, the positive rate of economic growth allowed us to pay off old bills, make strides in tax administration, and reduce the deficit to historic lows. To respond to the current crisis, we chose not to increase or implement new taxes. We also chose to forego millions in potential tax revenue to provide ongoing tax breaks. The simple truth is, people are hurting today, and people will be hurting for some time, unfortunately. Our economic recovery is vastly dependent on when and how well this pandemic can be contained, which means the longer the health crisis lasts, not only in the Bahamas, but around the world, the deeper the economic downturn is likely to be. In our Resilient Bahamas plan, we chose targeted investments for public health enhancement, social service support expansion, infrastructure rebuilding, job creation, and small business development and growth. This is a plan that provides a foundation of support for the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, even as we focus on the immediate and short-term response, we already have in place a component of the strategy to return the country to a long-term sustainable path. By this, Mr. Speaker, I'm not simply referring to the work of the Economic Recovery Committee, or ERC, which was given a mandate by the Prime Minister to present a bold vision for a modern Bahamian economy and to chart a course for our full economic recovery. I'm also speaking about our medium-term fiscal and debt sustainability plans. The government's decisions and actions to build a more resilient Bahamas has come at a significant but necessary financial cost. I outlined this in detail during the budget communication. The borrowings we will have to undertake to close the deficit gap has implications for the country's long-term fiscal health. These are facts that we cannot and we are not shying away from. On the contrary, we are eager and committed to resuming our plans to achieve fiscal balance. Despite the opposition's theatrical dismissal of our plans, we have already considered proactive economic recovery solutions. And despite the opposition's hyperbolic ravings and twistings of the facts, the brave and bad judgments and failures during their term in office are plain to see. One of their most notable failures is blowing their budget target by $560 million in a pre-election spending spree. In addition to that, they left behind over $300 million in unpaid bills, leaving many Bahamian small businesses with a wallet full of IOUs. For many of these bills, there was never any budgetary allocation or public acknowledgement until we brought them into the light and devised a plan to deal with them. The opposition never followed through on fiscal responsibility legislation, nor procurement legislation, even though they had talked a lot about them. They made no effort to institutionalize any standards of fiscal discipline or accountability. The facts show that they were reckless, undisciplined, and willfully ill-prepared for the task of governance. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian people chose this administration to be at the helm during this moment in history, for good reason. When we saw better times, we made the difficult decisions to slow the growth of government spending and to enhance government revenues. It was the right choice then and appropriate for the time. Now that we are in a crisis, we are making the decisions to protect families, communities, and businesses, and to invest in building a more resilient Bahamas. We are making tough decisions openly and transparently, as is the way of this minister-led administration. One thing that has always been certain, Mr. Speaker, despite all of the bombast and hypocritical rhetoric, we have demonstrated in our deeds that we are different from the side opposite. The world knows this. The Bahamian people knows this. Our decisions may not always be popular, but we do the right thing at the right time and for the right reasons. The FNM administration is taking the bull by the horns to effectively manage the social and economic fallout of two of the most catastrophic economic events in the country's independent history: the deadly destructive Category 5 Hurricane Dorian and the global coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic. Let us not forget, the FNM administration also successfully navigated the 2008-2009 financial crisis. History shows that we are the party best suited to manage the country's finances in moments of crisis. The Bahamian people can have confidence in our record of strong, proactive, responsible fiscal management. Guided by our values as a party and the steady hands that characterizes our management capability, this administration has proven that in the face of adversity, we are more than capable of transitioning a weakened and lackluster economy to stable footing. In contrast to the opposition, Mr. Speaker, we have a clear tale of two governments, one that is ready and capable for any challenge, and the other that has nothing to show for itself but crocodile tears, broken promises, and bad debts. When we assumed office, the domestic economy averaged meager growth of less than 0.5 percentage point over the last 5 years. In just 2 years, Mr. Speaker, our mix of guided economic policies delivered an average growth rate of twice that proportion. That's right, Mr. Speaker. In just 2 years, we doubled the average growth of the domestic economy relative to the previous 5 years. And those are facts, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I can say with confidence today that this administration is ready to turn this country around once again. We did it before, and we can and will do it again. Mr. Speaker, it is important to make this distinction between both the management styles and records of administrations because of the challenges we have before us. Just as a recap, our real GDP is expected to decline by an unprecedented 12% this year, representing the largest single economic contraction since these statistics have been kept. Our economy is expected to be a lot smaller at the end of December than it was in January. This means fewer business imports, lower sales revenues for businesses, and therefore lower revenue for the government. The 2020 outlook for the global economy is in a worse state than the 2008-2009 global financial crisis. Despite the slight improvement in unemployment rates and recent rallying of stock markets, real GDP in the United States is projected to decline by 5.9% in 2020, which will have a direct impact on the pace of tourism recovery. The public outcry on display in the United States as a result of racial injustice will also, no doubt, add further strain to the recovery of the United States economy. The global and domestic economic environment is having a significant impact on our fiscal situation, especially our revenue performance. The projections for fiscal year 2020-2021 put total government revenue at $1.7 billion. We are projecting a shortfall of $900 million compared to our annual projection for last year. Although concerning, given our performance just 3 months ago, I want to reiterate that the government is not broke, and we certainly, and we caution against any fear-mongering that relies on such claims. Faced with this scenario, we have put in place arrangements to ensure we can adequately meet our obligations, as any responsible government would. Mr. Speaker, in these treacherous climate, the government had 2 choices. We could reduce public spending and shrink the economy even further, or we could invest in public health, economic and social relief measures to mitigate the impact of the pandemic and ensure the viability of our key economic base for recovery. These 2 choices are not unique to the Bahamas. Governments around the world are facing the same decisions, and the most prudent governments are making the appropriate shift to provide economic relief and expanded social welfare spending, even though these temporary measures will cause some deterioration in their fiscal positions. For example, we saw the United States government recently pass $3 trillion in economic relief packages to aid in their fight against COVID-19, while Canada provided up to $82 billion in support via tax incentives and direct support for consumers and businesses. Right here in the region, Jamaica injected over $170 million into their economy in response to the crisis, while Barbados invested some $40 million. Like our leading regional and international counterparts, we recognize that the government's contribution to the economy are a vital lifeline. So drastic cuts would do more damage to the already weakened economy. Instead, we chose to curtail non-essential spending while focusing on targeted investments in priority areas. Because of these necessary investments, we are projecting to run a fiscal deficit of $1.3 billion, or some 11.6% of GDP. Yes, Mr. Speaker. As one meme put out by the opposition being circulated says, this is the largest deficit ever incurred in the history of the Bahamas. That is a fact. But it is also in response to the largest revenue drop in the history of the Bahamas as a result of a 1-2 catastrophic sucker punch to the heart of the Bahamian economy. The unprecedented level of borrowing is to fund this unprecedented deficit. It is as simple as that. We are acting responsibly to adequately fund the government and to ensure that our people do not suffer unnecessarily. Bahamians, I encourage you not to be fooled or misled by the rhetoric of the opposition. They're being busy muddying the water and sowing the seeds of division at a time when we all should be unified against the challenges we face. The leader of the opposition said so himself, that we needed to be unified, but yet he was all about sowing seeds of discord and disunity during a time when we needed everybody to be on deck. Mr. Speaker, they have no new ideas. So their propaganda machinery has reverted to personal attacks. Pure sip about who is rich and who is elite, where people live, as if it's relevant to the challenge that we face. All the while, it is the side opposite, Mr. Speaker, that got rich and switched. Side opposite. Because they like to tell you about where they come from, Mr. Speaker. If I were to ask them right now, they'll tell you about how they come from over here, or the barefoot, and all the rest of it. But ask them where they are today. And ask them whose backs did they achieve what they achieved today. So, this whole thing about who rich and who elite and all the rest of it. We need to look in the mirror, Mr. Speaker. Look in the mirror. On the one hand, Mr. Speaker, they carried placards about labor rights and the struggle. While on the other hand, they were living lives of privilege, able to go to elite schools, locally and internationally, Mr. Speaker, and to write checks to support deviant minds, to scandal other people's names in the name of partisan politics. And I have to be careful about this, Golden Eyes, because I know where I come from. Listen, I invite you. Because one thing I do not begrudge any Bahamian for, and that is working hard, diligently, and achieving success. I am proud of them. I encourage them, and I support them. I'm not the one. Mr. Speaker, so I went to Hawksbill High School. Listen, so you should know. You shouldn't be doing what you're doing then. You shouldn't be supporting what you're supporting, Mr. Speaker. So when they talk about who is elitist and who is rich, do more than them trying to paint a picture of themselves as one of you. Instead, look at the decisions this government has made to invest in Bahamians, in Bahamian families, communities, and businesses. Mr. Speaker, listen, should really not speak. The strategic shift from fiscal consolidation to resilient Bahamas.
East Grand Bahama, the member for Anderson on a point of order.
Yes, but the member for East Grand Bahama is misrepresenting the simple history of this nation. No political organization has done more for the development of the Bahamian people than the Progressive Labour Party. In fact, that member over there would not be in this parliament were it not for that struggle. And I want him to say, the member just said to me that I shouldn't speak. And I want him to tell me why I shouldn't speak. Tell this country why I cannot speak. Tell this country, yes, everything's unacceptable except for coming to your mouth. Mr. Speaker, I ask you the member. The member has said,
Honorable member.
yeah.
Resume your seat. When the chair is entertaining,
had two members on your seat, you let me stop and say nothing.
Honorable member,
You chastised me, you said a word to Mr. Bahama. That's not fair. It's not fair.
I'll tell you what is fair.
You tell me what's fair.
The speaker, when the speaker intervenes, you resume your seat. If you rise on a point of order, it is for the chair to determine whether that point of order was well taken, and not for you or any other member, for that matter, to make that determination. So I just want to put all members on notice that while honorable member, resume your seat.
I was asking if I could finish my question.
The chair is speaking.
You never call my name. I must be able to defend myself in the
Honorable members, as we resume, we expect a lively and a real provocative debate. However, the provocation will be with limitations, with respect to the rules. Now, when you rise on a point of order, you state the point of order and you state the rule that is being infringed. You don't go on a discourse and make remarks that are not relevant to the point of order. And so the chair is making a point with respect to the point of order that was raised. You had sufficient time, honorable member, and
personal reflections on a member.
and the point of order is not well taken. Honorable member, Bahama.
Listen, they wrong and talk with people that buy groceries.
Mr. Speaker, again, I think the point has been made, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. No, I'm going on the road. Because one thing, you got to know where you come from.
Honorable members, address yourself.
Listen. Anyway, Mr. Speaker. Listen, we do that. We want to go down. It doesn't matter to me. Mr. Speaker, the shift. Mr. Speaker, I hope we get that time back because this is ridiculous. Mr. Speaker, the strategic shift from fiscal consolidation to resilient Bahamas was not easy to make, given our success in bringing down the deficit. We understand the implications, and that is why it is only a temporary departure from the government's fiscal consolidation policy. And by that, I mean our commitment to move towards balanced budget. A few months ago, this government was well on its way to balancing the budget. How laughable it seems that the same opposition that was criticizing our efforts at fiscal discipline now wants to accuse us of being fiscally reckless. They practically harassed us, Mr. Speaker. They practically harassed us, Mr. Speaker, to spend more and run up large deficits. You remember, Mr. Speaker, throw money on the ground, you remember that? Their criticism is an obvious and patented misrepresentation that all Bohemians see through. So you want to rewrite history again. Some people want to think that rewrite history again, Mr. Speaker, but that is on the record. But Mr. Speaker, while they were claiming we were too focused on the numbers, that we were too busy listening to international organizations, they were all the while embarrassed by our success at bringing down deficit after deficit, because they never had the political will to to do so themselves. They left grasping at straws.
Honorable member, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Ron San Salvador, on a point of order.
The number is incorrect.
That the deficit under the Progressive Liberal Party, and I refer him to his own numbers again. How many times do I have to show you and demonstrate to you that under our prudent management, the deficit of this country went down when we met the finances and economy of this country in a wheelchair, as was confirmed by the Prime Minister in 2012. Well, the deficit of over 600 million, we didn't complain and drop. The point of order is that, and from that day, up until 2016, the deficit was going down. It's going down. And when we indicated that Walking and Matthew contributed to the deficit in 2017, they laughed at us. And now you understand what it means today. Mr. Speaker, he said that he's listening to the Parliament, that he paid no attention to the deficit, when in fact, if he looks at the numbers, from 2012 until 2016, the deficit was going down each year. And it's in this book.
Thank you, honorable member.
It's in the book.
Honorable member.
Who members on their feet?
The chair recognizes honorable member from Houston. I didn't need you to tell me how to do my job. I'm shouting across the Parliament and disrupting the proceedings with respect to the functioning of the chair. Now, put me on notice that I'm not tolerating that during this debate. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
Would the member kindly withdraw his remarks?
That the deficit under the watch of the Progressive Liberal Party between 2012 to 2017 was not going down. The books are here to show it. It's here. You printed this too.
Honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
So stop, don't mislead the Parliament.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, the member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, the reality is, and I'm going to show it in a minute, the numbers. Mr. Speaker, I don't, the member makes this argument every time I make this statement. And I've explained it to him several times. So at the moment, I'm going to withdraw it. No problem. No problem. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. We keep borrowing. I don't understand. I'm not going to get into it at the moment because I've said to the member for Cat Island over and over that we really have to stick to the law. Let the member for Exona talk about the numbers. But anyway, they're grasping at straws to find all manner of silly excuses, essentially suggesting that we're bringing down the deficit too fast.
Honorable member.
Thankfully,
Honorable member, Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, are you on the point of privilege now?
Then you have by suggesting that I don't know. I know what I don't know, and I accept what I don't know. And I also know that it ain't dumb. I don't make me dumb because I don't know. I'm dumb when I do know I don't know, like some of them over there. Him in particular.
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, you say you are protected. He said he insulted me. Why would you allow him to say, I don't know the numbers? But I can at least read them.
Honorable member.
That's what I was doing, reading the numbers.
Thank you. Honorable member, if you want to make the assertion that you are being insulted, You cannot make that assertion while insulting others. Honorable member, there's no further discussion on that. Okay? The chair recognizes the honorable member, so you stand behind it.
Mr. Speaker, I do apologize to the member for Carolina Remke and San Salvador if he feels that I've insulted him. I'm just giving some, advice, and I apologize if that is insulting to you. Mr. Speaker, thankfully, thankfully, we were steady at the hand and ignored their idle talk. At the end of our second year in office, we recorded a deficit of $222.4 billion, or 1.7% of GDP, marking the lowest deficit and fiscal ratio achieved by any administration in the Bahamas in decades. It was also the first time since fiscal year 12-13 that our government has met its deficit target. Mr. Speaker, let me say that again. It is also the first time since fiscal year 2012-13 that any government had ever met its deficit target.
Honorable members, member
Mr. Speaker,
Golden Gates, and the member for Anderson. The member for East Grand Bahama has the floor. Yes. Honorable member. Honorable member for East Grand Bahama, you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, this achievement in meeting deficit targets is the opposite of slackness. It is because of this past success that we are in a position to aggressively respond to today's crisis. But, Mr. Speaker, it is as if this hypocrisy knows no bounds. It is the opposition, through their spokesman for finance, Deputy Leader, that recommended a $2 billion deficit as the appropriate response to COVID-19 in the first place.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island. On the point of order?
The member is misleading. Whilst I expect this from some, Mr. Speaker, I do not expect it from the member who is the Minister of Finance. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, he received a comprehensive copy of the plan that never called for a $2 billion deficit. The plan called for $1.2 billion stimulus. We invited the minister to go out and borrow early at low rates. And if the crisis was short, pay back some of the money, paying down some of the high interest loans, Mr. Speaker. He is misleading. He is intentionally doing so, Mr. Speaker. And I'm quite frankly disappointed that he would do so, Mr. Speaker.
Cat Island says he's not disappointed in me. I appreciate that. But, Mr. Speaker, I think it's a matter of public record. It is a public record, Mr. Speaker, right? And there's no doubt about what was said. It was said, okay? So anyway, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian public can make up their mind. Although we did not agree with the opposition's outer numbers, we agreed with the premise. Unprecedented times call for unprecedented budgets. Clearly, eager to demonstrate his leadership mettle and even larger leadership ambition, the Shadow Minister of Finance valiantly documented his recommendations on behalf of the opposition in his submission to the government and to the country. Mr. Speaker, it is no use in the member for Exuma and Ragged Island trying to back away from those statements and suggestions. They were on the record.
Honorable member.
The member has the comprehensive plan, right, which I've just explained. And I don't want to have to do this over and over and repeatedly. The member for East Grand Bahama reads very well. He received a comprehensive copy of the plan before it was released to the public, and he is going down the road again. He is misleading and intentionally doing so, Mr. Speaker, and I'm disappointed that he would do so.
Mr. Speaker, the member, suffice it to say, because I can let him, he's gonna present his own plan. Yeah. I know, I will. but the precedent, but the point that I wanted to make in respect to that is that the member, I know it is uncomfortable, I understand. The member agrees with us that countercyclical spending and unprecedented budgets are necessary to address these challenging times. That's only the point that I wanted to make. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that it is our duty and responsibility as a government to implement the appropriate fiscal policy measures in ordinary and extraordinary times. And this time, we believe wholeheartedly that it is in the best interest of this nation and its people to support the restoration of our communities and our economy with Resilient Bahamas, our plan for restoration. Mr. Speaker, I must now turn to the matter of borrowing and the fears and misconceptions that have been concocted about our debt management and related fiscal affairs. Mr. Speaker, the opposition has taken on the habit of randomly throwing out numbers with no basis in reality to represent our borrowing record, which has only compounded the misinformation. Even as they have been ridiculed or have been ridiculing our public education efforts for being too eye-catching and easy to understand, they've been publishing their memes to misrepresent the F&M's record. Not surprisingly, for those who do not care much for openness and transparency, they're actually complaining, Mr. Speaker, and I saw this for myself. They're actually complaining that we're investing in presenting the budget to the citizens of the Bahamas in an appealing and accessible way. So you say too slick a PR job. The ministry's public education efforts for the annual budget are inspired by a worldwide movement towards citizens' budgets, which is fundamentally about ensuring the budget information is accessible to non-specialist readers and that citizens are included in the budgeting process. This is the global best practice that anyone can research. There is a place for partisan politics and PR wars, but more importantly, there is need for government communication and fulfilling our responsibility to inform, educate, and to listen to the public in a nonpartisan way. The Ministry of Finance's efforts to make the budget more visual, interactive, and less technical promotes accessibility, inclusion, transparency, and accountability, and gives the crisis we are navigating, and given the crisis we are navigating, these efforts have become even more vital. So, Mr. Speaker, I can only ask the opposition to embrace this new era of transparency and to not be afraid. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, for their political ambitions, but fortunately for Bahamians everywhere, I am proud to inform the opposition that citizens of all ages are appreciating the lengths to which the team at the Ministry of Finance is going to create an online social media presence. We are using this presence to inform them on a consistent basis as to how their tax dollars are being allocated in the budget, or how they are being spent. I hate to be the one to break it to the members opposite, but this country is not going back to the days when the details of the budget were obscure in technical documents, and when persons got jargon-filled reports once or twice per year. It's the people's time What used to happen then will not happen now. The people are now better informed. And any government that may follow us at some point in the future, not too recent future, may not be able to shield the facts and the reality of the fiscal situation as they may have done in the past. They will have at their disposal a national website for the annual budget. And I encourage all of our citizens to please go onto that website and view for yourself. View for yourself information and be informed. The website is www.bahamasbudget.gov.bs. bahamasbudget.gov.bs. They will have at their disposal digital channels to provide public information directly to the Bahamian people and all stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, having highlighted our efforts to make the budget more accessible, let me now return to the matter of borrowing. And let me start with the story of the real numbers. The real numbers tell a story of responsible borrowing. Let us walk through the important questions one by one. How much have we increased the debt by since taking office? Where has this administration invested public resources? Are we at risk of default on loan payments? On one or more occasions, the opposition has tried to assert that this government, this minister-led administration, has borrowed roughly $1 billion per year since coming to office. And the member just now said $3 million. They have blasted the number 3 billion in borrowing all over social media. I want to clear up this misconception at this point, Mr. Speaker, and hopefully once and for all. So how much have we increased the debt since taking office? Mr. Speaker, this administration has only increased the direct charge, which is the technical name for government debt, by $977 million since taking office. This number, I can show you, this number comprises gross borrowing and debt repayments. You get, sorry, Mr. Speaker, when you take the difference between gross borrowing and debt repayments, you get net borrowing, which is the true picture and proper measure of government borrowing. You see, what they've been trying to do, Mr. Speaker, is to lump in net borrowings for new expenditure along with debt repayments and claim that that is what we've been borrowing. Everybody knows that every year loans become due and those are refinanced, Mr. Speaker. But I'm going to help him. I'm going to help them. Mr. Speaker, furthermore, our net borrowing favorably compares to the opposition, who increased government debt to $1.2 billion during their first 2 full years in office. It only requires some basic math to know that 1.2 is greater than 977. In other words, the opposition borrowed more money in its first full 2 years than this administration has borrowed thus far. So we're wondering, why are they comforting and contorting themselves in the way they have just to spread fake news? $3 billion in fake news.
Honorable member, the chair recognizes the honorable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island. On a point of order.
Mr. Speaker.
On a point of order.
Do I have the floor?
Yes.
I said, no, give me a break.
Mr. Speaker, the member, East Grand Bahama, is departing from the estimates that he lay out in these books. And with respect, he is therefore misleading. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the proceeds from borrowing, and we look at the first year of the F&M's being in office, we see proceeds of borrowing in the region of 1.8 billion. 1.8 billion, Mr. Speaker. When we go to the following year, we see 1.09, and then we see 1.3 billion, and then they project to borrow proceeds from borrowing another 2 billion in 2020 and 2021. Mr. Speaker, so when the member talks about borrowing, he must be precise and reflect on the details in his estimates that clearly demonstrates proceeds from borrowing. And these are his numbers, Mr. Speaker. So I invite the member not to mislead the public.
Mr. Speaker, you know, these accusations of misleading fly around a lot of times. But Mr. Speaker, you know, I've just explained to the House and to the member the borrowing that he's looking at, which includes debt repayments. Okay? Yeah, debt repayments. Because remember now, remember, the loans that you took out come due at some point. The money that you borrowed come due, and it has to be paid. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to tell you.
How much did we repay? How much did we repay? How much did we repay?
Speaker, this is... Mr. Speaker, I want to show this graphic for the members opposite, because obviously they still don't get it. Right? They still don't get it. Okay? They still don't get it. So, Mr. Speaker, as you look at the schedule, in the F&M administration in 2007 and 2008, to 2008, 2009, they borrowed at net borrowing, meaning additional borrowing, not debt repayment, but just plain straight borrowing to finance their deficit. $643 million. In the year 2012-13 to 13-14, 2 years, the Progressive Liberal Party administration borrowed $1.2 billion. Mr. Speaker, and again, the current Free National Movement administration, between 2017 and 18 and 2018 and 19, borrowed $977 million. Again, Mr. Speaker, this is clear. Okay? See, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite don't like the facts. And so they want to obscure and try to confuse people. I know you don't like my graphics. I know, because it's telling a story, so you don't like it. But Mr. Speaker, the facts are clear.
Honorable member,
Speaker.
the chair recognizes the honorable member for Mangrove Key, South and Central Andros. On a point of order.
Yes, I just like to intimate, and especially to the member for East Grand Bahama, who referenced a comment that I would have used a couple of times in this parliament, putting monies on the ground. I've gotten quite a bit of responses to that. And I know, no, hold on. That's the point about it. I need to clear it. I got it by myself. You just said. And I know that, and throwing money on the ground. The fact of the matter is that the member for East Grand Bahama himself also noted the fact that many people are hurting, lots of people are in need. Whenever I would have made this comment, it would have been made to emphasize the fact that there are many small food vendors and also the downtrodden and disenfranchised who would need their bills, who would need their funds so their lives can go on in a normal
Honorable member for Mangrove Key.
Mr. Speaker,
Honorable member for Mangrove Key.
I should be allowed.
I've given you some liberty.
Mr. Speaker, but the member has gotten.
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, resume your seat a moment. Let me do this, hopefully for the final time. Honorable member for Mangrove Key, South and Central Andros, and all other members. First of all, when an issue arises, try to be quick if you want to respond to that issue. Try to be quick to your feet. And if you want to raise an issue on a point of order, I'm going to read these rules once and for all. The rules are clear. Rule 38 on point of order says, a member who rises on a point of order shall, when invited by the speaker or the chairman to do so, state the infringement of these rules on which his point of order is based, and then resume his seat. When, this is 38.2, when a point of order has been raised, any member who is then speaking shall resume his seat, and after the point of order has been stated, the speaker or the chairman shall rule on it as soon as may be possible. 38.3 says this, a member shall not dissent from a ruling by the speaker or the chairman except by a substantive motion for that purpose. I believe we all understand what that means. When the chair makes a decision on whether a point of order is well taken or not well taken, there should be no dissent by any member. There should be no effort to try and engage the speaker in a debate on his point of order or the ruling. The rules are clear. These rules are applicable to each and every member. If you want the rules changed, let the Rules and Business Committee meet and make a change to the rules. But until that happens, I am bound by these rules and I intend to enforce them. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the point that is illustrated by the chart is that in every year, every fiscal year, you have two elements of borrowing. You have borrowing to meet the fiscal deficit, and you have borrowing to finance the rollover of existing loans. We call it gross borrowing. That gross borrowing would include both debt refinancing as well as new money to pay the deficit. And so when you look at the chart that we have presented, it shows the new money that has been borrowed. Not refinancing, but new money. And the chart clearly shows where the side opposite has no standing in this matter. None, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, the member is misleading once more. There is a saying about statistics and how you can manipulate them. It uses an unparliamentary line in there, so I won't repeat it. Something about little white something, 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 Mr. Speaker. The member is misleading. The member is
on your point of order.
member is misleading intentionally so, Mr. Speaker.
What is the misleading?
Mr. Speaker,
What is the misleading statement?
I'm about to tell you, Mr. Speaker, if you give me an opportunity. The member intentionally makes reference to material not included in his estimates, point number one. And then he intentionally uses old data, Mr. Speaker. If the member wishes to draw a comparison between the prior administration and this administration, he should use his most recent data. His most recent data would take him to the end of 2019, 2020. And on his own arguments, Mr. Speaker, that would take his net borrowings, the increase in the national debt, to roughly 1.55 billion. So I invite the minister to do a comparison with using the most recent data and compare that with the record of the former administration. I would more importantly invite the minister to move to his main content, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, With due respect, you know, as they say, numbers don't lie. And so the member is inviting me to bring the current number. These are apples and apples, comparing the first 2 years. Yeah, I know this is an area you didn't expect me to go. I understand. You got 2 years, the first 2 years of the previous administration and the first 2 years of the current administration. Comparing apples and apples, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I will bring for him the current number so that we can carry on. Because see, I'm confident about this. We'll bring it for him. All right? Mr. Speaker. And you know, just to further to put this matter to bed. No government controls when they control that the repayment date, the rollover date of any loan can come due in your administration, and you have to pay. You have to roll it over because we don't have to pay to pay it off. Mr. Speaker, the member for Exuma knows better, and I'm going to leave it at that. Mr. Speaker, and so Mr. Speaker, that's a serious charge. That's a serious charge, Mr. Speaker. You know, and I don't want to. You know, South and Central Landers is my friend. But when you make those kind of definitive statements, when the facts are clear, is offensive. Okay? And I would invite him on his return to apologize for that. Uncalled for. And he can't prove it, Mr. Speaker. I never said, Mr. Speaker, if I may just say, as an aside, I never told any member of this House that they could not talk. What I did say was some members should not talk. I never said can't, couldn't. And I invite the member to go to the record. You see, when you're sensitive, when you know some things are sensitive to you, and so you hear what you know what's on your mind because you're guilty. Right? I'm not speaking to any member, Mr. Speaker. I'm not speaking to any member. Right?
Honorable members.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member for Angleston, what is your point of order?
Of a member, he doesn't know what's in my mind. The member said, yes, you did say that. The member.
Honorable member for Angleston.
Never mind, Mr. Speaker.
The member for East Grand Bahama did not identify any member.
Okay, never mind.
Never mind. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, we can go even further and just look. Well, sorry, Mr. Speaker, again, this administration borrowed less than the side opposite during their term in office, even as we had to manage and mitigate two historic catastrophic disasters. And the former F&M administration borrowed less than them, even as they had to manage and mitigate the world's global financial meltdown crisis. Mr. Speaker, we did not just borrow for borrowing's sake. The spending priorities of this administration have always been clear. In fact, on the new budget website, you can click a link to view the 2018-19 budget, the 2019-20 budget, and this new 2020-2021 budget. Archived for all to see is a page called Our Priorities, which shows the main spending priorities in each budget over the past 3 years. In our first fiscal year, we had an agenda of inclusive growth, job and economic growth, social progress, environmental sustainability, and public sector reform and modernization. In our second fiscal year, our spending priorities were digital transformation, inclusive education, 21st century infrastructure, jobs and economic growth, and the green revolution. This year, Mr. Speaker, we have clearly articulated our top 5 priorities: public health and safety, the social safety net, employment generation, the development of the domestic economy, and small business and government reform. In all of these areas, we have seen significant investment by this government, as well as important outcomes. For example, in inclusive education, last year, the government made a sizable investment in education by offering free tuition
to Bahamians from age 2 to 2022. For the upcoming budget year, we have increased our allocations toward inclusive education by some $5.1 million. Throughout the debate, the Minister of Education will provide more details as to what these investments translate into for Bahamians. In digitization, this administration solidified its commitment to the digitization of government processes by creating an entire department to focus solely on these initiatives. Since its establishment, we have allocated nearly $20 million towards our digitization efforts. The Minister of State for Grand Bahama will provide more details to how this project is progressing in his contribution to the budget debate. Mr. Speaker, small business development. Over the last 2 fiscal years, we have allocated over $11 million in capital funding to the small business community and have increased allocations this upcoming year to a total of $55 million. And this, Mr. Speaker, is a program that I'm very, very enthusiastic about and is reaping rewards for our country as we are empowering ordinary Bahamians who would normally be locked out of the capital, access to capital, and therefore out of the business and entrepreneurial sector. And we're seeing some real promising success in this category. Spreading the wealth, as the member for Golden Isles, who's not here, would say, making the wealth more common. Dorian Expenditure. To date, we have spent for recurrent and capital transactions nearly $80 million towards hurricane restoration and rebuilding efforts, including $6 million to support water restoration efforts in Abaco, losing my voice now, and a portion of the $90 million allocated to restore electricity on Abaco. In addition to these programs, we managed to pay off approximately $230.1 million in arrears since fiscal year 2018-2019, leaving only $85.5 million left to pay in these old bills. We started our term with over $300 million in arrears left by the former administration. We committed to because we're still paying it off. It's painful. We committed to the Bahamian people that we would honor homegrown vendors by fulfilling their IOUs, and we've done just that. Mr. Speaker, there's no way for the opposition to spin the numbers in their favor without misrepresenting them. Not only have we been more responsible with our borrowing, we have put long-awaited guardrails in place to protect the public from debt mismanagement. The opposition took advantage of the system when it had no boundaries, no rules, no standards for transparency and public disclosure. Instead, we've enacted a new standard of fiscal responsibility, which is why we have time and time again spelled out our fiscal strategy for the Bahamian people, explaining our deviations from our fiscal targets, and publishing our fiscal adjustment plan to get back on track. Mr. Speaker, I want to urge the opposition to stop using gross borrowing numbers to mislead the public when they know that nobody in the Bahamas or around the world does that. If we were to use gross borrowing as the true measure of government borrowing, I could mistakenly assert that the last PLP administration borrowed $4.5 billion when their net borrowing was in fact $2.7 billion over the course of the 5 years. But we would not be so misleading as to blast on social media that the former administration borrowed $4.5 billion during their last term, which with nothing to show for it, because we are better than that, Mr. Speaker. The gross borrowing numbers include regular, habitual refinancing that all governments here and elsewhere do as a matter of course. I will say it one more time. This administration has only added $977 million to the government debt obligations. This is our total net borrowing since coming into office 3 years ago. And those resources were invested directly in the Bahamian people. So to the opposition, we can only say, stop it. Stop misleading the Bahamian people. Now to the public concern about the default on our debt obligation.
Member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island.
The
On a point of
member
order.
is accusing the opposition of being misleading when he is doing just that. He just said that net borrowing since they came to office was 977 million. I pointed out earlier to the member, and I know he takes this point very clearly because it's on his chart, the 977 million, even if we use that measure, only goes to the end of 2018, 2019. We're now at the end of 2019, 2020, and the minister knows quite well that even in his own chart, that number would be somewhere around 1.55
Mr. Speaker, again,
billion with a B.
Mr. Speaker, again, we use these misleading numbers, statements very loosely here. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, I presented the comparison, Mr. Speaker. This fiscal year is not even done yet, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, again, the member has his opportunity. He has his opportunity to speak. And and when he speaks, I may have something else to say. But he has his opportunity to speak. No, please, I want you to use my numbers, because we know with your numbers how that goes. Mr. Speaker, now to the public concern about default on our debt obligations. Mr. Speaker, even under the most difficult of circumstances, the Bahamas has always honored its debt obligations. This is a commitment we take seriously, and we have made appropriate revisions to do so in this budget. It is important to recognize that the crippling events of Hurricane Dorian and COVID-19 means everyone is under immense pressure. Public sector entities, private sector entities, and individual households. Just as the government has a plan to address the overall macrofiscal, and economic environment, the prudent thing for all of us to do is to plan ahead and prepare. Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear. This budget will be an anomaly. We do not intend to return to our fiscal consolidation efforts. Sorry, we do intend to return to our fiscal consolidation efforts over the medium term as the Bahamian economy recovers. This new course will not simply be a pass or an excuse to return to the old ways of fiscal management. We remain committed to fiscal responsibility and to continued transformation to sustainable fiscal management in the Bahamas. This, Mr. Speaker, along with our plans to restore a resilient Bahamas, will ensure that the Bahamas continues to be a viable, independent, developing country. There is no doubt this crisis is going to force us to do things differently, to move outside of our comfort zone, to approach things we have done the same way for many years in a completely different manner. The Prime Minister will speak more to these details when he talks about the work of the Economic Recovery Committee. However, on the fiscal front, we need to examine where the opportunities are for fundamental shifts. Of course, private sector growth is our ultimate solution to growing the economy, which will create sustainable public financial outcomes. It is our intention to come out of this pandemic with a strong recovery, with a tide that will rise all boats. However, we have to be honest and sober about our short-term growth prospects on our historical growth trends. In 2018, we reached an economic growth peak in about a decade of 1.6% real GDP growth. This shows that even in the best of times, our economy is stymied by structural barriers. In addition to pursuing diversification within our main economic sectors and through new niche markets where we have competitive advantage, our strategy is also to look at areas and structural shifts that are within our immediate control and can release growth-promoting opportunities. Every year, the government spends over $400 million subsidizing state-owned enterprises, or SOEs, many of which are inefficient and uncompetitive. In some cases, there is either an overlap in mandates and responsibilities, or the mandate has not been reviewed and updated in many years. The reform agenda for SOEs is a major component of the government's planned return to fiscal consolidation. Not only will this make SOEs more dynamic efficient, and self-sufficient. It will also reduce the amount of money the government allocates to subsidize these entities. To this end, we have targeted a $100 million annual reduction in subventions over the next 4 years, as these entities move to optimize efficiency and cost recovery strategies. SOEs will have to adapt new business practices. They will have to look at their fee structures, and they will have to explore opportunities to consolidate operations to better use public funds. The Ministry of Finance is already encouraging this movement within agencies that support the small business sector. The Bahamas Development Bank, the Small Business Development Center, the Bahamas Venture Fund Limited, and the Bahamas Agriculture and Industrial Corporation, BAIC, for example, are being tasked in the upcoming budgetary year to find ways to work more closely together to reduce operating costs and improve efficiency. This will allow us to serve more Bahamian entrepreneurs more quickly. In addition to state-owned enterprise reform, we are continuing to work on our revenue enhancement initiatives, exploring new sources of revenue from commercial services that the government may provide, and to ensure that we are maximizing our existing sources. We also intend to support both domestic and foreign direct investment to help grow our economy. Together, these efforts will eventually allow us to achieve and sustain our fiscal consolidation or balanced budget objectives. We will deliver a more detailed fiscal adjustment timeline in the 2020 Fiscal Strategy Report. However, our initial forecast shows an improvement in the deficit ratio from 11.6% in the imminent fiscal year to 6.7% in the subsequent year, with a further reduction to 2.9% in fiscal year 2022-2023. I now turn to the Ministry of Finance and many of the legislative, policy, and programmatic initiatives we are undertaking as part of the Resilient Bahamas response. Our strategic plan for rebuilding and restoring this nation has 5 critical aims. It is about protecting the health and safety of Bahamians. It is about providing adequate social support to vulnerable members of our community. It is about stabilizing the domestic economy. It is about sustaining employment, and it is about accelerating our government reforms. The Ministry of Finance is going to play a major role in improving the ease of doing business and modernizing several areas of our public service. At a time when the country needs to put its best foot forward, each ministry and department must lead in this area. By accelerating its adoption of modern technologies and facilitating private sector expansion and investment in the ministries and across government, the Resilient Bahamas Plan will support a more robust economic recovery overall. At the Ministry of Finance, we are modernizing legislation and improving systems to be a better catalyst for economic growth. We are adopting cashless technology, improving our service delivery, and enhancing the overall ease of doing business. We are increasing efficiency and adopting new tools and practices to reduce leakage and corruption. And some of this work is not glamorous or flashy, but is far-reaching and long overdue. At the time of the 2020-2021 budget communication, we tabled a number of proposed legislative changes as a part of our revenue measures. The bulk of these changes are administrative by nature, inclusive of typographical changes, insertions and deletions, and amendments for clarification purposes, and alignments with acts that may, in some instances, intertwine across processes. In some cases, they provide an extra layer of requirement for some entities as a means of strengthening reporting and governance across the public sector. Mr. Speaker, to support the government's goal to strengthen public financial management, we are amending the Financial Administration and Audit Act to require all government authorities, companies, and corporations that receive more than 50% of their operating budget from the central government to produce and submit monthly and quarterly financial statements. This amendment will not only allow for a more programmatic approach to government budgeting, but will also aid in the cost rationalization projects currently underway by SOEs. Similarly, we will amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act to allow all financial warrants to be endorsed or approved electronically. This supports the government overall push for digitization, particularly with the new norm set by COVID-19. This amendment will also help to increase the ease of doing business as the time associated with approving financial warrants will be less, thereby making the process of payments and settling of government bills more convenient and efficient. Mr. Speaker, we've made a number of changes in the Value Added Tax Act 2014 to include an express provision for the treatment of insurance settlements, which only allows insurance companies to claim settlement payouts as an input tax when the claimant is a VAT registrant. This will clear up a matter that has generated much confusion in the insurance industry. We will also amend the Act to show that VAT is now payable on instruments and transactions related to loans under the Bahamas Cooperative Credit Union Act 2015. I will not go through all of these changes, Mr. Speaker, in the interest of time. Further, Mr. Speaker, details on these and other related changes are included in several blogs posted on the budget website. And just as an aside, we also have a page on the new website with the full list of proposed custom duty reductions or tariff changes as promised during the budget communication. Mr. Speaker, to bring the Business License Act in line with tax structures, we are amending the Act to now allow for 30 days to appeal an assessment as opposed to 21 days. Furthermore, we are clarifying the business license tax is calculated on the total turnover of a legal entity and not the business type within the Act by inserting a new subsection in Section 8. We are also amending the Act to strengthen the government's ability to collect unpaid taxes and address non-compliant taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, in the area of customs administration, we will amend the Customs Management Act to make it mandatory that pleasure vessels obtain a certificate of clearance before departing the Bahamas in an effort to strengthen control and oversight of the sector. Mr. Speaker, as one of the things we found as we tried to assess the exposure for COVID-19 was that we were unable to determine with any degree of accuracy how many vessels, private vessels, were still in the Bahamas on cruise permits because there was no requirement for them to declare on leaving the country. And so we are making this amendment, learning from that lesson, so that we will know at any time how many vessels are actually in the jurisdiction. And we're also making some other amendments that help us to track whether they're paying their appropriate fees or not at the same time. We're also making an amendment in the Customs Management Act that will allow for couriers to transport by sea, which is a new provision. Right now, couriers are defined in the Customs Management Act as air couriers, persons bringing items via air. We're expanding it to include via sea, because particularly in Grand Bahama, this is important to the couriers there, as they use the daily ferry service a lot of times to bring their goods for their customers. And so we're going to include them in that definition. We'll also amend the City of Nassau Revitalization Act to clarify the southern boundary to include the extension of the eastern boundary from Mackey Street to Montague Beach. That boundary had been omitted from the previous act. Altogether, these legislative adjustments will achieve greater governance by strengthening the clarity and administrative applications of these laws. Mr. Speaker, over the past 2 years, this administration has developed and implemented a number of initiatives towards increasing tax compliance and ultimately revenue collection. Whilst we have provided substantive measures for tax deferral and relief, the government remains responsible and accountable to ensuring existing laws are respected and that all taxpayers pay their fair share. As both myself and the acting financial secretary stated at the post-budget press conference, cracking down on tax cheats and ensuring the government obtains every cent due to it is one area where the public treasury's income might improve amid the COVID-19 pandemic fallout. I want to pause now to provide a brief update on the progress of each ministry's priority initiatives. The Customs Modernization Program was designed to transform the old, antiquated administrative system within the Customs Department with a view to increasing compliance as well as revenue collection. Under this program, the phased introduction of the new electronic single window, dubbed Click to Clear, has made clearing goods more efficient and faster. Last year, we implemented a national public education campaign, including several stakeholder engagements, to ensure all importers were registered on the system and trained to use it properly. This campaign successfully registered 26,747 individual users on the system and over 4,000 commercial entities. Last fiscal year, Click to Clear processed over $1 billion in government revenue for the Customs Department. Up to April of the current fiscal year, which factors in the impact of Hurricane Dorian and COVID-19, the system has collected just over $800 million. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to inform this Honorable House that ongoing work of the Revenue Compliance and Enforcement Unit, formalized by this government, continues to achieve exceptional results in their contribution to the enhancement of revenue and the building of internal capacity. The unit has had a total fiscal impact of $39.2 million in the first 10 months of 2019-2020 fiscal year. The enhancement unit is currently composed of 35 persons, and we have approved additional staffing for 12 more qualified persons once we are able to do so, once the financial situation turns around. Mr. Speaker, the collection team, amplified by additional hiring last year, collected $11.6 million prior to the pandemic. And we were in the process of hiring additional collectors, as I mentioned, just before the pandemic and the obvious adjustments we've had to make. Lastly, the revenue unit was recently given responsibility for the collection of outstanding real property taxes. In addition to the current complement of 8 call center agents who actively pursue these debts, we are dedicating resources to hire an additional 5 Bohemians to increase the number of collection calls. In the first 10 months of 2019-2020, this team had a fiscal impact of $17.6 million. Mr. Speaker, at the onset of the current fiscal year, the government appointed a revenue auditor who was tasked to perform an in-depth review of the revenue and cash management processes and procedures within the government. Preliminary findings of this review identified a few persistent shortfalls in the current cash management system, which has led to challenges in revenue reporting. Many, if not most of these challenges, go back many, many years without resolution. A key contributing factor of the short, tell him text. Tell him the text. A key contributing factor of the shortfalls in the cash management system is a lack of human capital, as the major revenue agencies often find themselves unable to adequately man the revenue management process due to lack of staffing. Thus, as I mentioned in the 2020-2021 budget communication, the government will be introducing a dedicated revenue and cash management unit, which will be responsible for the management and implementation of effective strategies to realign the revenue and cash management cycles of the Bahamas government. The unit will be led by a director of revenue who will lead a team of revenue officers stationed in the Treasury and in each of the large revenue-generating government departments, agencies, or ministries to implement and control the processes that need to be in place to properly manage government's revenue. All told, this unit is intended to underscore the accurate and timely capture and reporting of government revenue, as well as reduce the potential for fraud, collusion through enhanced oversight. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned at the time of the mid-year budget statement, the Cabinet had approved the reestablishment of the Audit Review Committee, which will be tasked with overseeing and facilitating the successful implementation of all recommendations presented in existing and future audit reports by the Auditor General and internal and external reports. The appointment of this new committee will modernize and improve the archaic structure we met in place when we assumed office, thereby increasing compliance and oversight reporting. I am happy to announce that the committee has been finalized and we've appointed Mr. Pedro Delaney as chair and Mr. L. Sidney Saunders as deputy chair. As a result of the impact of COVID-19, committee operations are now anticipated to begin in July. Mr. Speaker, the development of the small business sector has been a key tenet of our transformation socioeconomic agenda. As the backbone of the private sector, the more we facilitate the development of MSMEs, the more job creation opportunities are available, which ultimately results in increased economic activity and higher productivity. Most importantly, the more we support Bahamian entrepreneurs and small businesses, the more we empower and give real and powerful voices to Bahamians as owners in their country. At the time of the 2019 budget communication, I announced that the government was considering a $25 million loan guarantee to the Small Business Development Center through the Inter-American Development Bank to expand the financing of MSMEs, as well as to add technical capacity. I am happy to assert today that the government has chosen to proceed with this arrangement, which will help to provide funding to hundreds of MSMEs. This loan will help to fund in part up to $50 million in funding requests for 2020 to assist small businesses with hurricane recovery and COVID-19 recovery and continued business support through loans, grants, and equity arrangements. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this time to commend the Small Business Development Center for its exemplary service and remarkable achievements to date. As the first of its kind in the Bahamas, they have done an exceptional job at executing business advisory and training, as well as helping to bridge the funding gap for small businesses. In addition, I want to congratulate them for the way in which they were able to pivot in a moment's notice to respond in the aftermath of both Hurricane Dorian and COVID-19 by creating and efficiently administrating programs designed virtually from scratch, specifically to provide relief to MSMEs. As of mid-May, the SBDC has registered over 9,700 persons into their programs for business advisory, disaster recovery support, and under the newly established business continuity program for COVID-19 impacted businesses. The SBDC approved nearly $40 million in funding across its programs, with just short of $6 million approved for hurricane impacted businesses specifically, and another $29 million for those impacted by COVID-19. Further, the SBDC has disbursed close to $20 million in funding, of which $3.4 million assisted businesses in Abaco and Grand Bahama after Hurricane Dorian, and $10.4 million to businesses affected by the virus. For those businesses seeking advisory and funding outside of the hurricane and COVID-19 program, some $2.8 billion has been disbursed. Mr. Speaker, as aforementioned in the 2019-20 budget communication, we will be moving the purchase, processing, and payment of cruising permits, fishing permits, and foreign charter licenses to an online solution. And again, this is an area where I'm very happy to see Bahamian firms coming forward with solutions. And so we hope that we will be able to empower them through this new development. In line with efforts to digitize government processes, we have ventured to do this through a joint project spearheaded by the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Transportation and Local Government, and the Ministry of Tourism, and the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources. Not only will this move increase the convenience to customers looking to acquire these permits and licenses, but it will also help to undergird a more efficient collection of these fees for the government, thereby supporting the revenue base. The new system will also collect the 4% tax levied on all charters carried out by foreign charter license holders, which is an area the government has been seeking to increase compliance in for quite some time. We expect the initial phase of this solution to be rolled out before the fourth quarter of this year. Mr. Speaker, from the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, this government delivered a compassionate strategy and robust response plan to help and support the citizens of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Leaving no sector untouched, the pandemic quickly derailed many of their normal lives by completely wiping out the only source of income for some and considerably reducing the wages of others. In particular, 9 months into the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian, and then riddled by a pandemic, the islands and peoples of Grand Bahama and Abaco are still hurting, still vulnerable, and still vying for change. Again, I want to reassure all Grand Bahamians and Abaconians that this administration has been and is still here for you. I want to reassure all Bahamians that this government, your government, has drawn together every resource at its disposal to protect this country and support its people through this ongoing health and economic crisis. I said on the morning of May 27th, and I want to reiterate again, the commitment of this government that no Bahamian will be left without food. No Bahamian will be left without hope. And no Bahamian will be left to total desperation as a result of the twin crises this country currently faces. Mr. Speaker, each and every Bahamian will benefit and must benefit from the fruits of our plan for a resilient Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, all told, we have allotted some $86 million in direct support to Bahamians in this 2020-2021 budget through the extension of COVID-19 policy measures we implemented in March of 2020. This is in addition to the nearly $60 million allocated in the current fiscal year for social assistance directly related to COVID-19. So altogether, this government expanded its social safety net by some $140 million in the wake of COVID-19. This is an unprecedented measure for an unprecedented time. Mr. Speaker, to be sure, our approach to ensuring the health and safety of all Bahamians is multifaceted. Whether it is the business continuity or the health of our public finances, the welfare of our people must be at the center of our efforts. They are the bedrock of our future success. Along with providing a support system to the vulnerable amongst us, it is also our duty to facilitate a strong and healthy economic recovery through the development and implementation of sound policies. The only way the vulnerable can one day fend for themselves is through the expansion of opportunities, not continued dependence on the state. We believe, Mr. Speaker, in the dignity of work. In this vein, complementary to our host of direct social support, we are expanding our tax relief measures, which are intended to act as incentives to increase economic activity. In this environment, we know that it is especially hard for small and medium-sized businesses to retain staff. We know that it is particularly challenging for startups who may have only been in existence for a year to keep up with their operating expenses. And we are addressing them, Mr. Speaker. In our fiscal adjustment plan following Hurricane Dorian, we outlined that the impact of the storm would last over a few years. Consequently, even after 2019-2020, we expect to see continued revenue loss and increase in expenditure as we continue our rebuilding efforts. COVID-19 has not changed that reality. In fact, it has exacerbated it. Thus, we have extended some of the relief measures specific to hurricane-ridden islands in the 2020-2021 budget. That is why we've extended the Special Economic Recovery Zone to the end of December 2020 and have made provisions for building materials only concessions to apply from January 2021 to June 2021. This means that for the rest of this calendar year, Abaco and Grand Bahama will continue to benefit from duty-free import of materials, fixtures, furniture, vehicles, and equipment for approved commercial projects and residential construction. Business license waivers for all new businesses and existing businesses that retain at least 60% of their employment pre-Dorian levels. Real property tax waivers on eligible property and up to 50% in VAT credits on the sale of qualifying property. In addition, we have allocated funding of some $66 million towards continued restoration efforts. Specifically, some $46 million is provisioned for the continued restoration of Abaco, $4.7 million for Grand Bahama, and another $15 million for disaster management, which includes efforts by the new Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, Management, and Reconstruction. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to rebuild critical infrastructure in the Second City, which will facilitate a growing and striving economy. The Prime Minister spoke to this last week, indicating that a new hospital for Grand Bahama is in the pipeline. However, as a new hospital can take up to 3 years to construct, we will continue upgrades and renovations to the Rand Memorial Hospital in the near term until construction can begin on the new facility. Further, we are continuing school repairs throughout the islands of Grand Bahama, as well as road repairs and other infrastructure upgrades. The Grand Bahama Utility Company continues to work earnestly to ensure that potable water supply is restored throughout the island and has made stellar progress in the months leading up to the pandemic. In the same vein, the Grand Bahama Power Company has also been working steadfast to restore the transmission and distribution systems in East Grand Bahama. And I do want to pause there and thank them for their efforts, but I also want to encourage them to speed up their efforts as there are residents currently on from the High Rock to the Gold Rock Creek area in particular, who are now ready for reconnection. And so as the power company moves towards the east, going into Pelican Point in the next week or two, I want to encourage them to immediately or simultaneously move towards the east, towards the west, so that this vital service and necessary service can be returned to those persons who are prepared to receive electric service as quickly as possible. It's been a hard, long road for these people, Mr. Speaker, and I feel for them having to endure it, having been through a similar process before in one of the previous hurricanes, not to have warm water and to be able to cook a meal is a challenge. To be able to read at night or to watch television is a challenge. And so I feel the stress and the struggle of those persons who continue to be without these vital services. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I want to reiterate the significance of this budget and its critical role to these unprecedented times. As a representation of the government's priorities and plan for the next 12 months, this budget sets the framework for the restoration of a better, more resilient Bahamas. In this budget, we have committed to supporting the Bahamian people in these extraordinary times while setting and implementing a dynamic mix of policies that will underpin the development and advancement of Bahamian families, Bahamian businesses, and the overall Bahamian economy. Fair-minded Bahamians realize the challenges we are facing as a nation. Again and again, we have met the tough circumstances head on and made the tough decisions in the best interest of our beloved Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, those opposite have unfortunately positioned themselves to spin the narrative. But no political spin can erase the stubborn and sobering facts. This government, within 3 years, has faced with what no government has tackled in our modern history. Both Dorian and COVID-19 have proven deadly, and recovery continues in both instances. Abaco was enjoying an incredible growing economy. Boom, some say. and Grand Bahama was positioning itself to rebound from Hurricane Matthew. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, those opposite who now speak doom over our efforts and have miraculously found all the right solutions did very little for those impacted by Hurricane Matthew. Mr. Speaker, we have clear evidence of how poorly those opposite have managed people's money. Their apathy and uncaring abuse is widely known. Yet if you listen to them, they purport to hold a monopoly on love, passion, care, and concern for the Bahamian people. The facts are stubborn, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding what we've met when we came to office, driven by our compassion, competent approach, and commitment to strengthening our economy, we have placed our money and resources to ensure opportunities for all Bahamians. This budget provides for the less fortunate amongst us, those who cannot work, those now without jobs in search of work, and those just flat out finding themselves on hard times. We are not providing handouts, Mr. Speaker. We are rallying together to unite the community and provide the support Bahamians need. This government did not create Dorian or COVID-19, and neither did the thousands of Bahamians displaced in their wake. Mr. Speaker, this is a government and a budget that meets Bahamians where they are and rises to the times we now face. This is a government with a heart for the people, all of our people, and this budget is a testament to that fact. These tough times calls for tough decisions. We will not be distracted. We will remain accountable. And when history marks these trying times, this government will be noted as leaders who faced unprecedented circumstances and gave their all to maintain and build an even better Bahamas. I remain ever grateful to the people of East Grand Bahama who sent me here, Mr. Speaker. The fine people of the East and the wider Grand Bahama should know this government will see to it that our adversities are harnessed to create opportunity. We have faced many adversities beyond our control, but God never fails. With his guidance and our commitment, better days lie ahead. Mr. Speaker, as I take my seat, I want to once again say to the people of East Grand Bahama that the provision for temporary homes, which I'm sure the member for Central Grand Bahama will speak to, is imminent. We expect within the next week or two to be able to start the construction of those temporary homes. We know that it has been a difficult period up to now, but hopefully this will provide some level of relief, even as we roll out the rebuilding assistance program and get the relief into the hands of an increasing number of residents who are prepared and ready to begin their personal rebuilding projects. And so again, I want to thank them for their perseverance and for their patience as we put in place all the pieces that are necessary to ensure we rebuild better, stronger, and more resilient than ever before. Again, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to an interesting and fruitful debate, and I move the budget revenue appropriation bill for second reading and passage.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
To the member.
The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Centerville.
Just on Speaker, clarification purposes, I just wanted to ask the member for East Grand Bahama two quick questions, just so that I'm clear. The audit review committee that you mentioned, is that a statutory committee, first of all? And then you also mentioned the national evaluation, there was some adjustment. So now extends from Market Street to Montague. Right, that is what, and if you can clear, and one more point, let me get, just one of the whole question. I just want to be clear on the diagram that we have in front of us, that we have borrowed. So you are saying, sorry, Mr. Chair, that the PLP would have borrowed 1.2 billion in their first 2 years, and the FNL would have borrowed 977 million in their first 2 years. Okay, and then how much of the 1.2 billion or the 977 million is refinancing versus new debt? Thank you.
The chair recognizes Honorable Peggy Scran Bahama.
I think these questions would probably be more appropriate later on in the debate when we get to the back and forth. But take your time, because I'm going to answer him now. As I explained, these are pure fiscal numbers. They do not include the repayment of debt or the refinancing of debt. All right. The question on the audit committee, it is not statutory, but it is good policy. It's to ensure that those recommendations, management recommendations that are made, and internal control weaknesses that are observed by the Auditor General, as well as the Internal Audit Department, are in fact carried through. And so this audit committee will be responsible for ensuring that the recommendations made are in fact implemented and helping those units where they need help in order to put in place the recommendations. The last question was, the National Revitalization boundary. There was a portion of the boundary that was undefined. For instance, on the Shirley Street, or from downtown to Shirley Street or Village Road, the boundary cuts through, I think it's the middle of the south side of Shirley Street, but it stopped at Village Road. So now we want to carry it through in that same imaginary line to the waterfront. So you have a complete area. It's just clarifying about it.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Honorable Member for Bamboo Town. The chair recognizes Honorable Member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Speaker, Bamboo Town is seconding, but in light of the hour, I want to move that the business of the House to suspend until 3 p.m. Today's date.
It says, Honorable Members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.